I got one for you too, Mama, said Addy excitedly. You open yours first, laughed Mama. So Addy untied the string. As the paper fell away, she saw a little rag doll with a bright red smile stitched on her face. She had a bow tucked in her hair, tiny hoop earrings, and a purple dress. Addy beamed with joy. Mama, she's so pretty, she said happily, hugging the doll. She's just as pretty as Janie was. Mama smiled at Addy. I stuffed her with some beans I saved. Addy hugged the doll. The beans gave her a lumpy plumpness that Addy liked. I'll call her Ida Bean, said Addy with a giggle. Now, Mama, sit down and hide your eyes while I get my surprise for you. Don't look, because mine ain't wrapped. Addy hopped out of bed and went across the room to her school satchel. She took out the gift she'd hidden inside. Are your eyes still closed, Mama? Addy asked before turning around. Sure enough, said Mama. Addy ran across the floor and placed her gift on Mama's lap. Now you can open your eyes, said Addy. When Mama looked down, there was a lovely scarf of beautiful green plaid before her. The edges were sewn with tiny, perfect stitches, and the ends were fringed. Addy, where'd you get this? Asked Mama in surprise. Addy told Mama all about the dress Mrs. Ford had repaired for her, and about the extra material that was left when she cut off the bottom to make the dress fit Addy. I spent yesterday afternoon hemming the dress and making the extra material into a scarf for you, Mama, Addy explained. Oh, Addy, said Mama gently, running her hands across the plaid. It's beautiful. Ain't we gonna look fine going to church this evening? Mama gave Addy a long hug. I'm proud of my girl, she said. Ida sat on Addy's lap while she and Mama had breakfast together. Then and propped Ida Bean in a chair so she could watch as Addy and Mama made sweet potato pudding. There was some pudding left over, so Mama put it in a small pan. We can leave this one here and have it tomorrow, Mama said. By the middle of the afternoon, the pudding was done, and its sweet, spicy smell filled the tiny garret. Then Mama and Addy got ready for church. Addy wore her beautiful new dress, and Mama took time braiding and fixing Addy's hair. Mama put her new scarf around her neck and tied it in a big bow. Addy thought Mama had never looked more beautiful. I'm going to take Ida Bean with me to show Sarah, said Addy, tucking her doll under her arm. Then Addy and Mama headed down the stairs and out to church. As they got closer to church, the sun was setting. They could hear the organ music. When they opened the big doors to the church and stepped inside, Addy knew that Sarah had been right. The altar did look magical, with the manger scene and the silvery star shining high above. Addy and Mama had just been seated when a loud chord blasted from the organ. The choir began to walk down the aisle singing Joy to the World in strong, happy voices. A glow filled the dark church as the choir marched in. Each member held a candle that cast shadows into the church. Addy watched for Sarah, who was at the front of the choir. Sarah turned and smiled at Addy. Addy gave a shy wave back. She felt tears run down her cheeks. She was crying because the church was so beautiful, and the choir sounded so good, and she and Mama were together. When the service was over, everyone went down to Fellowship Hall for dinner. There was turkey and dressing, squash and greens, cornbread and applesauce. Addy had never had so much food on her plate at one time. When it was time to go back for dessert, Addy ignored all the cakes and pies and headed straight for Mama's sweet potato pudding in the shining black skillet. As she savored each smooth, sweet bite, she thought about Papa, Sam, and Esther. Maybe next Christmas, she thought. Maybe next Christmas we'll all be together, eating Mama's sweet potato pudding. After dinner, the adults lingered over their coffee while the children hurried to the room set up for the shadow play. Sarah and Addy sat on a bench next to each other, with Ida Bean snuggled between them. When all the children were settled, the door was closed. The lamps on the walls were blown out, and the room was completely dark. The children squealed with excitement and pretended to be scared. After a minute, A lamp began to glow behind the sheet in front of the room. All eyes watched as the first shadow figure appeared on the sheet, and the Christmas story was read aloud. One figure, and then another, and another appeared on the sheet, until soon Addy could see the shadow of Mary bent over the manger, holding her newborn baby, with Joseph standing at her side. 3 shepherds stood beside them. A deep, rolling voice continued to read as all the children sat in the dark, quietly watching the shapes against the lighted sheet. As the star appeared to guide the wise men, the door at the side of the room opened. A shaft of light from the hall filled the darkened room. The children turned to see who had opened the door. It was a tall man, though Addy could not see his face. His shadow was a shape she recognized. Addy jumped up and struggled past the girl next to her, tripping over her feet, stumbling as she hurried to the door. Addy knew who was standing in the door, standing there right now, not in a dream, not someday, but right now. "Papa!" she burst out. "Papa, is that you?" "Is that my Addy?" came the answer. It was Papa. Addy rushed to him, and he swept her up into his strong arms and held her close for a long time. It was dark by the time Addy, Papa, and Mama headed back to the garret, walking hand in hand through the Christmas streets. When they got to the top of the stairs above Mrs. Ford's shop, Addy could see light under their door. "That's strange," Mama said. "We didn't leave the candle burning." When they opened the door, there on the table was a kerosene lamp shining brightly. Addy read the note lying beside it. "May the hope of the Christmas season shine in your lives always. Merry Christmas from Mrs. Ford," she read. Papa turned away from Addy. "What's wrong, Papa?" she asked. Then she heard him. He was crying. "Don't cry," Addy said. Papa faced Addy and knelt down in front of her. "I'm crying because I'm so happy. I'm so proud you can read," he said. "I always knew you was a smart girl." "Addy doing so good in school," Mama said. "She won a prize for spelling." "Mama can read too, and write," said Addy. "I've been helping her, and I can help you." "Come sit at the table, you two," Mama said. "I got something Papa might like." They sat down at the table, and Mama brought the little pan of pudding that they'd set aside that morning. "Sweet potato pudding," Papa exclaimed. "Ruth, it was like you knew I was coming." "We never stopped hoping," Mama said, smiling. Addy picked up Ida Bean and crawled into Papa's lap. Papa ate the pudding while he told Addy and Mama about the time since he was taken from them. "Me and Sam was separated that very next day. I don't know where they took him, but I think it was further south." "Or maybe he escaped," Addy said hopefully. "Maybe," Papa said. "If there was a way for your brother to run, I know he found it. I couldn't, though. I was by hand and foot all the way to my new plantation, and after all that, all was freed 2 months after I got there." "And then you found your way to Mama and me," Addy said. Then Mama and Addy told Papa about leaving Esther with Auntie Lula and Uncle Solomon and escaping into the woods and on to freedom in Philadelphia. Paused for a minute. Then he said, "I'm going to try my best to get Esther and Sam back with us so we can all be together right here in Philadelphia like we planned. There was a Freedmen's Society in Maryland that helped me come here too. Maybe the Freedmen's Society in Philadelphia can help us." Addy laid her head against Papa's chest. She felt certain that their dream would happen. "One day," she said, "we all gonna be together. All of us, with Esther and Sam, too." "You tired, Addy," Mama said. "It's time you got ready for bed." "Can't I stay up longer?" Addy asked. "You want to sit up all night like a little old owl?" Papa teased. Addy laughed. "Yes, Papa. I want to stay up and be with you." "Well, I ain't going nowhere. I'm going to be here when you wake up in the morning," Papa said. "I'll be the first thing you see when the sun comes in that window." Addy loved that window from the second we moved in here, Mama said. But it got stuck about a month ago, and we can't get it down.
Let me have a look at it,
Papa said. He lifted Addy off his lap and went over to the window. Mama and Addy followed him. Papa studied the window and then hit the frame in 2 places. Then he pulled down hard and closed the window.
There, said Papa. It needs a new sash. I can make that, but it should be warmer in here now.
It already is, said Addy. She and Mama put their arms around Papa. In the window, Addy could see their happy faces reflected in the glow of the lamplight. Chapter 1, Double Dutch. The jump rope slapped on the sidewalk as Addy took her place at the end of the line of girls who were playing double dutch after school. Addy had just missed for the 4th time. "Don't worry," said her good friend Sarah. "Just keep trying. You'll get it. Double dutch is hard." Addy agreed. "It sure is. I can jump with 1 rope just fine, but the minute I try to jump into 2, I get all tangled up. The ropes go so fast, I can hardly see them." "That'll change," said Sarah. "Just don't get discouraged." In spite of her troubles with double dutch, Addy felt happy on this pretty spring day. Papa had been back with her and Mama for 3 months. They had moved out of Mrs. Ford's garret and into a boarding house. It was almost like having a big family again, except that Addy's brother Sam and baby sister Esther weren't there. Maybe that'll change someday too, she thought. "Look at there," Sarah said, pointing up the street. "Ain't that your papa driving the ice wagon?" Addy looked where Sarah was pointing. "That's Papa!" Addy exclaimed. "Let's go meet him." The girls took off and raced down the block.
"Well, well," Papa said in his deep voice when the girls reached the wagon. "Look what the wind done blown my way. I reckon you girls could use a nice chunk of ice to cool you down."
"I sure could," said Sarah, panting from the run. "Me too," said Addy with a smile. Papa got down from his seat. The girls followed him to the back where he opened the doors of the wagon. Inside were huge blocks of ice. Addy could feel a moist coolness come from inside. Papa slipped on a pair of thick gloves and took an ice pick from his belt. As he chipped away at a block of ice, glittering slivers flew into the air. He handed Sarah and Addy each a piece of ice the size of a small slice of pie.
"If you girls want to ride home, I'm going to be heading that way in a bit. I got a few stops to make first," Papa said.
"We'd like to ride. Come on, Sarah," Addy said. "I can't," said Sarah. "I got to get right straight home and help my mama." "All right," Addy said. "I'll see you tomorrow." She was disappointed. Sarah often had to help her mother do the washing that she took in to earn money. Addy and Papa climbed onto the wagon as Sarah left. Papa slapped the reins on the horse's back, and the wagon moved away from the curb. Addy sat close to Papa, sucking on her piece of ice. It was like holding a piece of winter. Addy had to shift it from hand to hand as it slowly melted and dripped. Papa gave her his huge gloves.
"Wear these," he said, "so your hands won't get cold."
"I wish Sarah ain't have to help her mama so much," Addy said as she put the glove.
"I wish she didn't neither," Papa said, "but her family I never did expect things to be easy and freedom, but I didn't think things would be so hard either."
Addy looked at Papa. His big smile had melted away. His face looked serious. "When Mama first got here, I didn't like Philadelphia at all," Addy said softly. "Mama worked real hard, and I spent most of my time alone in our room. I was missing you and Sam and Esther something awful. But Mama kept saying things was going to get better. It was going to take time for things to change."
"Sometimes it seemed like change is as slow as this here tired old horse," Papa sighed. "But at least in Philadelphia, things can change for the better."
"That's true," Addy said, finishing her ice and removing Papa's gloves. "When we was down on the plantation, there was no chance for things to change."
Slavery was draining the life out of all of us, said Papa. That's one reason I knew we had to take our freedom.
Addy spread out her arms. Here in Philadelphia, it seemed like my world getting bigger and bigger. Sometimes I can't believe I really go to school, that I can read and write and do my figures. I used to dream about it, but now it's real. And look at us, Papa. We're riding around the city on this big wagon. This is much better than worming tobacco plants. Addy saw a smile ease back onto Papa's face. Papa said,
There is some things better here. You going to school, me and your mama getting paid for our work, and we got a nice room at the boarding house.
Even though Sam and Esther ain't with us yet, Addy said, you being here done made things much better for me and Mama.
But I want them to be even better, Papa responded. Hauling ice don't take nothing but muscle. I'm a good carpenter. I got a good mind. I can build anything. Every carpenter job I try to get, they say they don't hire colored folks. Ain't that something, Addy? When we was in slavery, I was a carpenter. Now that I'm free, I find out these white people up north think a colored man ain't good enough or smart enough to drive a nail.
That ain't fair, Addy said.
Sure ain't, Papa said, but that's the way it is.
Papa made 2 deliveries before he came to his last stop at Natkin's confectionery shop. Addy could see a group of white girls about her age sitting at a table eating ice cream. She had walked by this shop once with Sarah, and Sarah had told her they sold ice cream there. Back then, Addy had not even known what ice cream was. But at a church social a few weeks later, Addy had her first taste of it. She loved it. It was creamy and sweet and cold. Without thinking, Addy blurted out to Papa, "It sure would be good to have some ice cream now." As soon as the words had flown out of her mouth, Addy felt awful. She shouldn't ask Papa to spend money on fancy treats, and she also knew that this shop didn't serve black people. She looked again at the group of girls talking happily inside. Papa glanced where Addy was looking. He didn't say anything as he climbed down from the wagon. Addy watched Papa lift a huge block of ice with a pair of large tongs. He rested it on his shoulder, headed down the alley, and went in the side door of the confectionery. On his way out, Papa stopped to talk to a white man who gave Papa a friendly pat on the shoulder. "Was that Mr. Natkin?" asked Addy. Papa climbed back onto the wagon.
"Yes," said Papa. "I'm telling you, Addy, this is some kind of freedom. I can deliver ice to make ice cream, but I can't even buy my own daughter a dish of it."
"That's all right," Addy said. "I don't like it anyway." Papa looked at her out of the corner of his eye. Addy could tell he didn't believe her.
"Let me make sure that door is closed," he said, jumping from the wagon.
When Papa returned, he was carrying something.
"Look here at what was in the trash," he said. "It's a busted-up ice cream freezer. I bet I can fix it up. Then we'll make our own ice cream."
Papa gave Addy a playful nudge.
"Won't that be nice?" he asked.
"It would be," Addy said. Papa tugged on the reins, and the wagon gave a slow lurch forward. Addy and Papa rode on in silence. She was thinking, Mama, Papa, and I, and all the colored people got a strange kind of freedom here in Philadelphia. There are jobs we can't get, and shops we can't eat at just because of the color of our skin. It ain't fair. When Addy thought of it, she felt just as dizzy as she had standing before the spinning loops of the double Dutch ropes. Being a black girl in Philadelphia was like being outside the loops of those ropes. It's the world Addy wanted to enter. But right now, she was saying, I'll be able to jump into that other world. Chapter 2. Sunshine. When Addy came home from school the next day, a small wagon loaded with furniture was in front of the tall boarding house. Boarders often moved in and out. Mr. and Mrs. Golden, who owned the boarding house, rented out 5 rooms. But Addy was the only child in the house. She looked carefully at the things in the wagon, hoping to see something belonging to a child. Maybe a doll sticking out of a crate, but all she saw was furniture. Mr. Golden came out of the front door. Addy thought that his name was perfect for him. His skin was golden brown.
Good afternoon to you, Addy. How are you today?
Good afternoon, Mr. Golden, Addy said. I'm doing fine. Who's moving in?
Mr. Golden sat down on the front step and wiped his neck with a handkerchief. By the looks of all this furniture, you'd think a family of 10 was moving in. But it's just one person, my mother.
Oh, Addy said, a little disappointed that she wouldn't be getting a playmate. Would you like some help?
No, but thank you kindly, Mr. Golden said, getting up from the step. He went over to the wagon. Addy went up to her family's room on the second floor. She flopped onto her bed and reached for her doll, Ida Bean, who had been lying on her pillow. Addy loved Ida Bean. She could cuddle with Ida and tell her secrets. But even with Ida to keep her company, Addy still felt lonely during the long afternoons. All the adults in the boarding house were at work. Mrs. Golden was busy making supper for everyone and didn't want to be disturbed. Mama and Papa didn't get home until late. Sometimes they didn't get home in time for the dinner Mrs. Golden served. On those days, Addy still joined the other boarders for supper in the dining room. This evening was one of those times, so when Mrs. Golden rang her bell, Addy went down to the dining room by herself. She took her place at one of the 2 tables. 4 other boarders sat at that table, but they didn't pay attention to Addy. They were talking about the trouble black people were facing on the streetcars. "Did you see today's paper?" Mrs. Golden asked. "There was almost a riot on a streetcar downtown. 3 colored people were hurt." "I'm getting too scared to even ride the streetcars at all," one woman said. A man at the table joined in. "Well, I heard a conductor threw a colored man off the Pine Street streetcar and broke his leg."
"If they'd just let us sit inside, there wouldn't be all this trouble," another young woman at the table added.
"That'll be the day," said Mr. Golden sourly. "I'll be an old man before I see that change come." Their talk scared Addy. The longer she listened, the less she was interested in her supper. She began playing with the napkin ring, and she only picked at her dinner of oxtail stew and mashed carrots. After dinner, Addy headed back to her room. She was halfway up the stairs when she heard a bird singing. Quietly, Addy tiptoed back down the stairs. The bird's beautiful song was like a trail that Addy followed down the narrow hall. The trail stopped at the open door of a room at the end. The room was unlit. The faint light from the hall was the only brightness in it. At first, Addy saw only her own shadow in the room, but as her eyes got used to the dimness, she saw a cage hanging before the window. In it was a small, yellow bird sitting on a perch, singing out happily. She stood at the door for a minute, enjoying its song. Suddenly, a woman's voice interrupted. "You can come in, child." Addy was so startled, she jumped. She hadn't seen anyone in the darkened room. She moved a few steps inside. The woman lit a kerosene lamp, and Addy saw the furniture she had seen on the wagon earlier in the day. The woman sat in a high-backed rocker next to the cage. "Good evening, ma'am," Addy said. "I'm Addy Walker. Me and my mama and papa live upstairs. You Mr. Golden's mama?" "That's right," the woman answered. "Come on in and meet my bird, Sonny." Addy went over closer to the cage. It was then that she saw the woman's eyes. The colored parts of her eyes, the irises, were covered with a cloudy whiteness. Addy stood staring at the woman. "Didn't know I was blind, did you?" Mrs. Golden asked. Addy answered quickly, "No, ma'am. If you blind, how did you know I was standing outside your door?" "I got plenty of ways," answered Mrs. Golden. "I've heard your footsteps whisper and face close together, so I could tell you were a child." "How old are you, Addy?" Mrs. Golden asked. "When is your birthday?" "I'm 9, Addy, but I ain't really sure about when my birthday is. I was born in the spring. My mom's ashamed that she didn't know her birthday." Her seatmate at school, Harriet, knew when her birthday was. On that day, Harriet's mother had sent fancy raisin tarts for the whole class. "That's a shame you don't know your birthday," Mrs. Golden said. "Just listening to you talk, I think you were born into slavery."
"Yes, ma'am," Addy said. "How did you know?"
"Well, most slaves don't know their birthday," Mrs. Golden continued. "I was born right here in Philadelphia, but my parents were born into slavery over 100 years ago. I'm an old woman, you know. I was there the day God invented dirt." Addy looked at Mrs. Golden in disbelief. Mrs. Golden laughed so light and high it made the room seem brighter. Addy joined in with her laughter. "You real funny, ma'am," Addy said. "My brother Sam would like you. He liked riddles and jokes." "Your brother?" Mrs. Golden said. "You didn't mention him. Does he live here too?"
"No, ma'am," Addy explained sadly. "We don't know where Sam is. He might still be a slave, but he wanted to be a soldier. He and my papa were sold off the plantation. Then my mama and me ran away up here. We had to leave my baby sister Esther on the plantation when we left. But someday we're gonna all be together again."
"Slavery has taken a lot away from colored people," Mrs. Golden said. "If we want to get some of it back, we're going to have to take it. It's going to be some time before your family gets back together. But I know one thing you can take for yourself right now, Addy. Whenever you want, you can choose a special day and claim it for your birthday."
Addy had never thought about this before. "That's a good idea," she exclaimed. "I want me a really special day. I want me a perfect day for my birthday."
"Now, I've told you I've been around a long time, and I never saw such a thing as a perfect day," Mrs. Golden said.
"How about the day that God invented dirt?"
Addy joked. "Oh, no," Mrs. Golden said. "Even that wasn't perfect, but there is something special in every day."
"How will I know what day is right for my birthday?" asked Addy.
"You'll just know," answered Mrs. Golden. "When that almost perfect day comes along, it'll be meant just for you. Now, the day God invented birds was extra special, close to perfect, and I was there for that, too." Sonny seemed to understand what Mrs. Golden was saying. He sang happily with his head cocked back and his breast puffed out.
"Mrs. Golden, why your bird in that cage? It seemed like he would be sad and lonesome in there all by himself,"
Addy said. Mrs. Golden closed her eyes for a moment before she answered. "I can tell you're a smart girl. You think about things. I do think Sonny is lonely sometimes. I think I can hear it in his song, but we keep each other company. When I hear him singing out from his soul, it brings sunshine into my life." Addy thought about that.
"But he's still locked up."
"Oh, child," answered Mrs. Golden, "that cage can't contain Sonny's spirit. It soars right out from behind those bars. That's what's important for all of us, to let our souls sing out."
"Sometimes it's hard to do that, you know," Addy replied. "To let yourself sing out if you're feeling lonely or sad."
"Sure is," Mrs. Golden said, looking right at her. "I'll tell you, Addy, when you first spoke to me tonight, I could hear a touch of loneliness in your voice. But even then, I could hear you singing out." Addy looked away from Mrs. Golden. Addy knew she was blind, but she felt like Mrs. Golden was looking deep inside her.
"Well, I better be going," Addy said. "I still have lessons to do, Mrs. Golden."
"Don't be a stranger at my door now," Mrs. Golden said. "Come visit me and Sonny whenever you'd like. And one more thing. Please call me my dear. That's what my family calls me."
"I will," replied Addy. "I will."
Chapter 3. Bitter Medicine. During the next week, Addy stopped by Madeir's room each day when she came home from school. "Good afternoon," Madeir would call to her before she even reached Madeir's door. Addy usually did her lessons in Madeir's room.
and sometimes Madeir had a treat of Benny candy for her when she finished. Addy savored the crispy, sugary wafers filled with sesame seeds while she listened to stories Madeir told her. Madeir told Addy that her father had been a soldier in the Revolutionary War, and that when she had been a chore girl working on Society Hill, Thomas Jefferson had visited a house where she worked. Addy loved the stories Madeir told, and was happy that Madeir was her friend. Addy still spent Saturdays by herself because Papa and Mama had to work, but this Saturday was going to be different. Mama had told Addy on Thursday, "I know you enjoy Madeir's company, but she's an old woman. She need her rest. Why don't you ask Sarah to come over on Saturday morning?" "Do you really mean it, Mama?" Addy had asked. Mama had never let Sarah come over to play before. "Me and Papa think you should play together more than you do," Mama said. Papa was sitting on the floor piecing together the ice cream freezer he had found. "Maybe Sarah can help you pick a day for your birthday," he said. "Remember, when you pick it, Addy, I'm going to make you ice cream. And you better hurry. I just about got this old freezer fixed." When Saturday morning came, Addy couldn't wait for Sarah to arrive. The night before, Mama had saved sweet cornbread for Addy and Sarah to share. Mama said they could have that and some milk for a treat. Addy spread an old blanket on the floor. She placed 2 small plates, spoons, cups, and the cornbread on it. Then Addy eagerly watched out the window for Sarah. When she saw Sarah coming up the street, Addy thundered down the stairs to meet her. Sarah was carrying a bag, and she had a smile on her face. "What you got in the sack?" Addy asked Sarah. "It's a surprise," Sarah said, as Addy led her inside and up the stairs. When they got to the room, Sarah looked at the spread on the floor. "This real nice, Addy," Sarah said. "It's like having a picnic inside." "I thought you'd like it," Addy said, as she poured the milk into their cups. "You're never going to guess what Mama and Papa said. You can help me pick a special day for my birthday." "I think you should pick it all by yourself," said Sarah. "I guess you're right," Addy responded, taking a sip of milk. "I just can't think of a day I want. Don't none seem right enough." After they had finished, Sarah held up her sack in front of Addy and said, "Keep your eyes closed and reach inside the sack for a surprise." "Oh, Sarah!" Addy cried as she pulled out a coil of rope. "I thought we could practice some double dutch," said Sarah. "My mama have so many clotheslines from her washing that my papa cut me this extra piece for us to jump with." The girls rushed outside, where Sarah wound the middle of the rope around a lamp post. She held the 2 ends in her hands and began twirling. Addy felt a little dizzy as she watched the 2 loops of the rope cross over one another. Again and again she tried to jump in, but Addy's feet always got tangled in the ropes as soon as she did. Sarah continued to encourage her. "That was a good try, Addy." Addy was feeling discouraged when she heard Madeir say, "Addy, take your time. Watch the ropes, but listen too." Addy looked up to see Madeir sitting at the window. Addy introduced Sarah to Madeir, who asked Sarah to start the ropes again. "Now, listen to those ropes," Madeir coached Addy. "They're singing out a rhythm. Hear it, Addy? Tip-tap, 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 tip-tap. Jump to that rhythm. You can do it." Addy never listened to the ropes before. She had only watched them. Now she rocked back and forth before the twirling ropes, listening, getting her body set to their rhythm. Then she jumped in. She jumped 4 times before she missed. She had never done so well. "You getting it," Sarah said. "That was much better." Addy was encouraged. "Did you see me, Madeir?" "I saw," Madeir said. "I saw." Sarah started twirling the ropes again. Addy's hands were sweating with anticipation. "I can do it. I can do it," she repeated to herself. Addy watched the ropes and listened. Tip-tap, 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 tip-tap. When she was ready, she leapt in between the loops. She was jumping 8 times in a row, 10, 12. She was losing count. A big smile burst onto Addy's face. Sarah shrieked with delight. Then the ropes twisted around Addy's feet. Sarah rushed to Addy and gave her a hug. "I knew you could do it, Addy. You was great." "I can't believe it," Addy said happily. "I finally got it." She turned to the window, but Madeira was gone. Addy jumped rope for a while longer. Then Sarah had her turn. When they got tired, they went inside to Madeira's room. Madeira's door was open, but she was not sitting in her usual place by the window. Instead, she was lying down with a wet cloth on her forehead. Sunny was silent. "Madeira, you feel all right?" Addy asked softly. "I was just resting," answered Madeira. "I have a terrible headache, and I've run out of medicine." "I'll go to the druggist and get you some more," Addy offered. "It's only a few blocks from here. Sarah will go with me." "If you're sure it wouldn't be any trouble," Madeira said. "We'd be glad to go," Addy assured her, taking the blue bottle from the table next to Madeira's bed. "We'll be back real quick." Madeira gave Addy 50 cents. "Get yourselves a treat while you're out getting my medicine," Madeira said, "and bring back the change." Addy and Sarah went straight to the drugstore, but he was out of the medicine Madeira needed. The girls left the shop. In a worried voice. "I know where there's another drugstore on Pebble Avenue," Addy said. "I saw it when I was on the ice wagon with Papa the other day." "Pebble Avenue is miles from here," said Sarah. "We can take a streetcar. We'll be there in no." "I don't think that's such a good idea," Sarah said. "You know we can't ride most streetcars." "But we got to get Madeira's medicine," Addy insisted. "I know which streetcars colored people can ride." Sarah thought for a minute. "But they dangerous," she protested. "Not if we stick together," said Addy. "Come on." Addy and Sarah walked 1 block to the avenue. They waited only a few minutes before a streetcar came, pulled by 2 horses. Like the other black riders, Addy and Sarah had to ride on the outside platform. Only whites could ride inside and sit in the seats. As the horses took off, Addy and Sarah held tightly to the railing. From the first day Addy had arrived in Philadelphia, she had wanted to ride a streetcar. Now here she was. The horses built up speed, and Addy felt a warm breeze sweeping past her. The city whizzed by, the row houses, the markets, the churches. They were a blur kissed by the green of budding trees. As the streetcar slowed, the city came back into focus. When the streetcar stopped for more passengers, the white people paid their fares first. They moved inside, where there were plenty of seats. The black people who came aboard had to squeeze their way onto the outside platform, which was getting crowded. Addy looked at Sarah, who looked worried. "We almost there," Addy assured her. The car pulled away so suddenly, the man next to Addy lost his balance and stepped on her foot. The people on the platform were crowded so tightly together now that Addy couldn't feel the breeze as the streetcar gained speed. Addy was relieved when they arrived at their stop and could get off. The drugstore was just a block away from the streetcar stop. The girls took off in a hurry, anxious to get the medicine and return to Madeira. When they reached the store, they found a long line of people waiting at the counter. Addy and Sarah went to the end of the line. "We'll be on our way in a few minutes," Addy said to Sarah. The girls inched their way forward in the line. 10 minutes passed before they were up to the counter. Before Addy could open her mouth to ask for the medicine, a man approached the counter. The clerk ignored Addy and waited on him. "We was next," Sarah whispered to Addy. "I know," Addy said softly. "Maybe he used to waiting on grown folks first. He probably ain't see us. He gonna wait on us next." When the clerk finished with the man, Addy started to say, "We'd like to get..." Before she could finish her sentence, the clerk walked away to wait on a white girl who had just walked in the door. "You can't say he didn't see us this time," Sarah said. Addy knew that Sarah was right. They watched in surprise as the clerk waited on the girl, who was no older than they were. He talked nicely to her as he filled her order. After the girl handed him her money, the clerk gave her back the change, counting it out in her hand. Finally, the clerk came over to Addy. "What do you want?" he asked in a stern voice that startled her. Addy handed him the medicine bottle and asked for another just like it. "Do you have money?" he asked. Addy thought that was a strange question. "Why would I be here if I ain't have money?" she thought. She tried to hand the clerk her money. "Put it on the counter," he demanded. Addy glanced at Sarah, who was looking at the floor. As Addy placed the money on the counter, she felt her face getting hot. She was angry and hurt. This was how her master had talked to her on the plantation. After Addy put the money on the counter, the clerk took it and got the medicine. Then, instead of handing Addy her change, he slapped it down on the counter. Some of it rolled onto the floor. Sarah scrambled to get it. Without saying a word, Addy picked up the medicine, and the girls left the shop. Addy and Sarah started down the avenue, walking hand in hand, to wait for a streetcar to take them back across town. "That man treated us so bad," Addy said. "Because we colored," Sarah added. "Some white folks think they're better than us." "But that's not right," protested Addy, hurt and confused. "No, it ain't," agreed Sarah. "But things ain't always right." When they got back to the streetcar stop, a large crowd was waiting impatiently. The first streetcar that came along was packed. It didn't even stop, and some of the people waiting on the corner began to grumble. "We gotta get on this next one," Addy said anxiously. "My dear waiting for her medicine." It was 20 minutes before another car came. It stopped, and Addy, Sarah, and the rest of the black passengers got on, crowding the platform. As the streetcar pulled out, they were packed so closely that Addy didn't have to hold on to the railing. She held tightly to the bottle of medicine. At the next stop, the conductor yelled out, "White passengers only!" A white man made his way through the crowd and got on. He pushed through the black passengers on the platform and sat down in one of the empty seats inside. "That's not fair," a black man in overalls called up from the street. "We've been waiting for a car for an hour." A woman standing near the man added, "There's plenty of room if you let us ride inside." "I don't make the rules," the conductor replied. "You'll have to wait for the next car." "We won't wait," the black man in the overalls yelled. He and some of the other people who had been waiting pushed their way onto the car. The conductor's voice boomed, "Get off of this car! Get off!" Addy felt her heart beating fast. She looked for Sarah, but Sarah had been pushed past her. As Addy turned, she saw the conductor pushing through the passengers toward the people who had just gotten on the streetcar. Some of them jumped off, but the man in the overalls didn't. He held on to the railing. When the conductor reached him, he grabbed the man by the straps of his overalls and pulled at him until the man lost his grip and fell to the street. Then the conductor turned to the black people on the platform. "Now, all of you colored people, out!" he bellowed. His face was red with fury. "Every last one of you!" "We already paid our fare," one woman protested. "I don't care," he screamed. "I'll call the police if every last one of you doesn't get off right now." Addy felt pushing from all sides. A sharp elbow hit her shoulder. Someone tramped her feet. Addy was caught up in the crowd, and before she knew it, she was swept right off the platform to the ground, ripping a hole in her stocking and scraping her knee. She watched the streetcar pull away from the stop with no one on the platform and plenty of empty seats inside. Sarah rushed up to her. "Addy, is you all right?" "I guess so," Addy said. "At least I didn't drop my dear's medicine." "I don't want to get back on no streetcar," said Sarah. Don't worry about that, said Addy. There ain't no more money for the fair anyway. We used up everything my dear gave us on the 2 rides we already took. How far is it to home? Sarah asked. It's a long way from here, Addy said. A long way. Chapter 4, Brotherly Love. It was late afternoon when Addy and Sarah finally made it back to the boarding house. As they trudged down the hall, Madeir called out, Addy, is that you and your friend? It's us, Addy answered. She tried not to sound as discouraged as she felt. Come right on in here, Madeir said, with relief in her voice. I was so worried about you. I was thinking of coming after you myself. Addy and Sarah went into Madeir's room. Addy tried to dust off her dress and hide the hole in her stocking, but then she remembered that Madeir couldn't see them. Addy, what took you so long? Madeir asked. Addy and Sarah glanced at one another. The druggist in the neighborhood didn't have the medicine, so we had to go to another store, Addy explained. Her voice was trembling a little. She was telling the truth, at least part of it. When Addy handed Madeir the medicine, Madeir reached for Addy's hand and held it in her own. Madeir's eyes looked right into Addy's. There's something else, Madeir said gently. I can tell by your voice. Reluctantly, Addy started telling the story. When she got to the part about being forced off the streetcar, Addy said, We was just minding our own business, and the conductor threw all of us colored people off. That ain't right. No, it's not right, Madeir said. I don't understand, Sarah piped in. I thought colored people in the North supposed to be free. But we're in the North, and we ain't free. Madeir was quiet for a moment, and then she answered. You're right, Sarah. We still have to fight for our freedom here in the North. That's because some people are prejudiced. Prejudice blinds people. It doesn't allow them to see people for who they really are. That conductor who mistreated you girls is blind. Blinder than me. I don't see why Philadelphia is called the city of brotherly love, Addy said. The druggist across town didn't want to wait on us because we colored. We can't ride inside the streetcars because we colored. We can't go into Natkin's confectionery to get ice cream because we colored. My papa can't even get a job as a carpenter because he colored. There ain't any brotherly love in this city, and it ain't ever gonna change. Why do you feel things won't ever change? Madeir asked. Because we can't change the color of our skin, Addy answered. Well, you're right about that, Madeir agreed. We can't change the color of our skin, but don't let prejudice make you its prisoner. Remember Sonny? His spirit goes beyond his cage with every note he sings. Gently, Madeir put her hand on Addy's cheek. You have to keep right on living. Right on. After Sarah had gone home, Papa stopped by the boarding house to take Addy with him on his last deliveries. As they rolled along on the slow-moving wagon, he asked Addy how the day had gone. Addy told him about their picnic in Double Dutch, but not about the trip to the druggist's and the trouble on the streetcar. Papa had a solemn look on his face, and Addy didn't think he needed to hear any bad news. I looked at meal break. I heard they was hiring carpenters for a warehouse going up over near the docks. When I went there, it was the same old story. The foreman told me he didn't hire colored folks. Addy encouraged Papa. Well, that man was blind. He couldn't see you for who you is, one of the best carpenters in all of Philadelphia. Papa put an arm around Addy's shoulders and smiled. He said, Well, listen to you. Don't you sound like a wise old lady? It's true, though, Papa, Addy said. Somebody gonna hire you for carpenter work someday. I just know they will. I hope you're right, Addy, said Papa. On Papa's last stop, Addy waited in the wagon while Papa hauled the heavy blocks of ice inside. She heard a bird start singing. It reminded her of Sonny, and Addy turned to see where the bird was. She didn't see it, but when she turned, she saw a sign posted on a building next to the one Papa had gone in. The sign read, "Carpenters wanted. Apply within." Addy jumped down from the wagon to find Papa. He was coming out of the building just then. Addy rushed to him and told him about the sign. "You should go in and see what they have to say," Addy said. Papa stood for a moment looking at Addy. "I know what they're going to say, but I'll ask anyway." Papa walked up to the building and knocked firmly on the door. Addy stood right beside him. A white man with a beard answered the door. His beard was filled with sawdust. "My name is Ben Walker, and I come to see about the carpenter job," Papa said in a strong, sure voice. "I'm Miles Roberts. Have you done carpentry before?" the man asked. "I sure have, Mr. Roberts," Papa said. "I'll tell you right now that I can't read or write yet, but I know how to work wood. I can do everything from build a stairway or a fence to lay a floor or frame a window. I got plenty of knowledge right up here." Papa tapped his finger to his head. "And I got a strong pair of hands. All I'm asking for is a chance." "Do you have your own tools?" Mr. Roberts asked. Papa answered, "I got a few, a hammer, a saw, and a plane." Mr. Roberts rubbed his beard. "I'll tell you what," he said. "Come back here on Monday morning at 6 o'clock sharp, and I'll put you to work." "Yes, sir," Papa said heartily. "I'll be here." Mr. Roberts shook Papa's hand and shut the door. Papa swept Addy up in his arms and spun her around. When he put her down, Addy said, "I told you, Papa, someday somebody was going to see you for who you really is." She and Papa climbed back in the wagon. Papa grinned. "Your mama is going to be so happy," he said. As they headed down the street atop the wagon, the sun was setting. Papa began to whistle a song Addy had never heard before. It was a song full of hope. Chapter 5. Changes in the Wind. Addy was happy when she woke up on Sunday morning. Mama and Papa wouldn't have to work. It was a sunny spring day, and Papa would start his carpenter job tomorrow. After breakfast, Addy and Mama and Papa went to church. Reverend Drake preached about being ready because a change was coming. He said the war would be over any day now, and when it was, a change would come sweeping through the country like the gusty winds of spring. Addy hoped that what the Reverend said might be true. After church, Addy and her parents went back to the boarding house to eat dinner with the other boarders. Then they went to Washington Square Park. Addy brought the jump rope Sarah had given her, and Mama and Papa turned it while she showed them how well she could jump double dutch. "How in the world did you learn to jump rope so good?" Papa asked with pride. Addy kept jumping as she answered, "Sarah and my dear taught me." "I can understand Sarah teaching you, but how could my dear?" Mama asked. "She blind." "She's blind, but she has a way of seeing things real clear," Addy said. "She's been teaching me how to see with my ears and sing with my heart." "Are you riddling me?" asked Papa. "You sound just like your brother." "No, it's not a riddle, Papa," Addy said. "My dear know all about the world. She been around since God invented dirt." As the afternoon turned to evening, Addy and Papa and Mama. "When are you going to pick your birthday, Addy?" "Well, Papa's got the screen freezer fixed and ready." "I'm waiting for an almost perfect day," answered Addy, "but I think it's coming soon."